Hello and welcome back.
Hi, everyone.
In today's lesson, we're going to help you understand English jokes and talk about humor more naturally.
And because it's April, we're also going to talk about April Fool's jokes, playful humor, and how English speakers often joke in everyday life.
Exactly. This is a really useful topic because humor can be one of the hardest parts of a language to understand.
Yes, sometimes learners understand every word in a sentence, but they still don't understand why people are laughing.
That's so true. So today, we're going to talk about what English humor often sounds like, how April Fool's jokes work, how to recognize when someone is joking, when joking is okay, and how to joke without sounding rude or awkward.
But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
It really helps the channel grow and reach more people.
And it helps more learners practice English in a natural, real-life way.
So if you enjoy practical English lessons like this, make sure you subscribe and stay with us.
First, listen to our dialogue.
Then we'll come back and explain the key phrases step by step.
Let's get started.
Hi, Alex. I thought today's topic would be perfect for April.
Hi, Eva. Let me guess, something to do with jokes?
Exactly. I thought we could talk about April, April Fool's Day, and more generally, how English humor works in real life.
That's such a good topic because humor is one of those things that people don't usually explain clearly, but it matters a lot in conversation.
Yes, and it can be surprisingly difficult for learners. Sometimes the language itself isn't hard, but the humor is. You hear the sentence, you understand the words, but you still think, wait, was that serious or was that a joke?
That's right. And I think that happens because humor is not only about vocabulary, it's also about tone, timing, culture, facial expression, and shared understanding.
That's such a good point. So let's start with something simple. Do you enjoy April Fool's jokes?
Sometimes, yes, if they're light, clever, and harmless. I think April Fool's jokes can be funny when they surprise people a little without making anyone feel stupid or upset.
That sounds like a very sensible answer. So for you, the joke needs to stay light.
Yes, definitely. I don't like jokes that cross the line and make someone feel embarrassed for too long. A good April Fool's joke should make people laugh, not leave them stressed or annoyed for the rest of the day.
I completely agree. I think the best jokes are the ones where the person can laugh too once they realized what happened.
That's exactly it. If everyone can laugh at the end, that's usually a good sign.
Do you remember any April Fool's jokes from school or work?
A few, yes. Usually they were small things, like someone saying something ridiculous in a serious tone just to see how long it took people to realize it wasn't true. Things like, the meeting has been moved to 6 a.m., or the coffee machine is permanently broken.
That's funny because the joke works partly because it sounds possible for a second.
That's often the secret. A good joke sits somewhere between believable and ridiculous. If it's too ridiculous, people understand immediately and the joke dies. If it's too believable, it can just create stress.
That's such a smart way to explain it. So balance matters, even in jokes.
Definitely. And timing matters too. Some jokes only work if the person says them in exactly the right way.
Yes, that's so true. Tone is everything. A sentence can sound serious or funny depending on how it's said. So, what kind of humor do you think English speakers use a lot?
I think English humor often uses understatement, dry humor, gentle sarcasm, and irony. People don't always laugh loudly or tell obvious jokes. Sometimes the humor is very quiet.
That's a really important point. So, humor can sound calm, not dramatic.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes the joke is that the person sounds too calm about something obviously strange, or they describe something terrible or absurd in a very mild way, and that contrast becomes funny.
That's such a good explanation. Can you give an example?
Sure, imagine someone drops their lunch all over the floor, and then says very calmly, "Well, that went well." The humor is in the opposite meaning. Obviously, it did not go well.
Yes, that's such a classic kind of English joke. The sentence is simple, but the real meaning is the opposite.
You're absolutely right. Or someone gets completely soaked in the rain and says, lovely weather. Again, it's not literal. The joke is in the contrast.
That's such useful real life English. So, if learners hear a sentence that sounds positive in a clearly negative situation, it may be humor.
Yes, very often, especially if the tone is a little dry or flat.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think sarcasm is common in English?
Yes, but it depends on the person, the situation, and the kind of English you hear. Sarcasm can be very common, but it can also be risky because if the listener doesn't know you well, it may sound rude instead of funny.
That's an important warning. So, sarcasm is not always the best thing for learners to copy immediately.
Well said. It's useful to understand it, but using it well is harder. You need good timing, the right tone, and usually some relationship with the person.
That makes complete sense. So, maybe first understand it and then use it carefully.
Yes, definitely. I think light, warm humor is usually safer than sharp sarcasm, especially if you don't know people very well yet.
That's very good advice. So, what kind of jokes are usually safer in English conversation?
Usually small observational jokes, light self-deprecating jokes, gentle exaggeration, and playful comments about everyday situations. Things that don't attack someone directly.
That's such a useful distinction. So, joking with people is better than joking at people.
Exactly. That's a big difference. If the humor feels shared, it usually works better. If one person becomes the target too strongly, the mood can change very quickly.
That's very true. What do you mean by self-deprecating humor?
I mean when people joke lightly about themselves. For example, if someone forgets something simple, they might say, clearly I'm doing very well today, or my brain has decided to take the day off.
That's such a useful example. It sounds funny because it's light and playful, not heavy.
Nice. It shows you don't take yourself too seriously, and that often makes people feel more relaxed around you.
That makes sense. Do English people joke a lot in daily conversation?
I think many do, yes, but not always in a loud or obvious way. A lot of humor is woven into normal conversation. A small comment, a tiny exaggeration, a dry response, a playful observation. It doesn't always feel like someone is telling a joke in the formal sense.
That's such an important point. Humor is often part of the conversation, not separate from it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why learners sometimes miss it. They're expecting something more dramatic, but the humor is actually very subtle.
That's so true. So, how can learners recognize when someone is joking in English?
I think there are a few clues. One is the situation itself. If someone says something that sounds a little too extreme, too perfectly timed, or slightly opposite to reality, it may be a joke. Another clue is facial expression or tone, and another is that other people often smile before they laugh.
That's very useful. So, learners should listen not only to words, but also to tone and context.
Yes, definitely. Humor often lives between the words, not only inside them.
That's beautifully said. Do you think jokes are acceptable everywhere?
No, definitely not. I think humor depends a lot on timing, context, and emotional awareness. Something funny in one situation may feel completely wrong in another.
That's such an important point. So, when do you think it's okay to joke?
Usually, when the atmosphere is relaxed, the topic is light enough, and the people involved feel comfortable. Joking can be a good way to create warmth, reduce tension, or make conversation more enjoyable, but only if it fits the moment.
That makes sense. And when is it not a good idea?
I think it's risky when someone is genuinely upset, when the relationship is too new, when the subject is too sensitive, or when you're not confident the other person will understand your tone.
That sounds very wise. So, humor needs emotional intelligence.
Yes, absolutely. Good humor is not only about being funny, it's also about reading the room.
That is such a strong point. I think some people try to be funny all the time, but they forget to notice whether it's actually the right moment.
Exactly. If the room is tense or someone feels uncomfortable, the joke may land badly, even if it would have worked perfectly in a different moment.
That's such a useful phrase, too. The joke may land badly.
Yes, very natural. People say things like, that joke didn't land, which means it didn't work.
That's really useful. So, what makes a joke land well?
Usually the right timing, the right tone, and the right target. And by target, I mean what the joke is about. If the joke is too personal or too sharp, it becomes risky.
But if it's about the situation, yourself, or something light and shared, it usually works better.
That makes complete sense.
So, how can learners joke in English without sounding awkward?
I think the safest way is to start small. Don't try to sound like a comedian. Just use light comments, warm exaggeration, or playful observations. Something like, well, this is going beautifully, when something small has gone wrong. Or, that was a very professional moment after making a tiny mistake.
That's so useful. These are little comments, not big performances.
Good, and because they're small, they sound natural.
Do you think British humor is different from other humor styles?
Yes, often. Of course, not everyone is the same, but British humor is often described as dry, understated, self-deprecating, and a little indirect. People may joke without changing their expression much, which can confuse learners at first.
Yes, that's such a good point. Sometimes the face stays serious, but the sentence is funny.
Exactly. And if you're waiting for a big smile to understand the joke, you may miss it.
That's so true. What about teasing? Is that common too?
Yes, gentle teasing can be common between people who know each other well.
But again, this is dangerous if you don't understand the relationship.
Teasing works best when there's trust, warmth, and a clear sense that both people are comfortable.
That's such an important warning. So, teasing is not for every situation.
Definitely not. If you don't know someone well yet, it's much safer to stay with lighter humor and kind observations.
That makes a lot of sense. So, if a learner wants to sound more natural and funny in English, what should they do first?
I'd say first listen more. Notice how people joke. Notice the tone, the pause, the understatement, the small exaggerations. And notice when they choose not to joke too. That matters just as much.
That's such good advice. So, humor is partly language, but also social timing.
Yes, it's a skill of listening and feeling the moment, not just memorizing funny phrases.
That's beautifully put. Let's give a few more examples then. What's a very typical, light English joke in an everyday situation?
Okay, imagine someone carries too many bags, drops one, picks it up, nearly drops another, and then says, "Yes, I've got everything completely under control."
That's perfect. The humor comes from the obvious lack of control.
Exactly. Or someone spends 20 minutes trying to open a difficult package and then says, "Well, that was designed by someone very kind."
That's such a good example of dry humor.
Yes. Or someone arrives late and says, "Nice to see I'm absolutely full of discipline today."
That's really useful because the English is not difficult, but the meaning is very playful.
That's often how it works. The language itself is simple. The humor comes from contrast, understatement, and tone.
So, if someone asks, how do English people joke, what would you say in one sentence?
I'd probably say they often joke quietly, indirectly, and with a lot of tone, timing, and understatement.
That's a very good answer. And if someone asked, when should I avoid joking, what would you say?
I'd say avoid joking when the person is clearly upset, when the relationship is too new, when the subject is sensitive, or when you're not confident the other person will understand your tone.
That sounds very sensible. So humor should build connection, not confusion or discomfort.
That's the point. If the joke creates warmth, it's probably working. If it creates tension, it probably wasn't the right moment.
That's such a strong summary. This topic is so useful because it starts with one simple question, do you like April Fool's jokes? And then it opens to humor, sarcasm, tone, timing, teasing, context, and social intelligence.
Exactly right. And that's what makes this such a good real English topic. It's cultural, practical, and very connected to how people actually speak.
Perfect. Okay, now let's look at the key phrases from the dialogue and see how to talk about jokes, humor, and April Fool's Day in English more naturally.
Yes, because this topic is not only about vocabulary like joke or funny, it's also about understanding tone, context, and social meaning.
Instead of only saying, it's funny, you can say, it's light and harmless. It's clever without being mean. It made me laugh. It was funny once I realized it was a joke. It was playful, not rude. It went a bit too far.
These phrases sound much more natural and specific.
That's true. Useful phrases from this lesson. April Fool's joke, a harmless prank. It sounded believable for a second. Everyone could laugh at the end. It crossed the line. It created more stress than humor.
These are very useful if you want to talk about whether a prank worked or not.
Yes, that's right. Useful phrases from this lesson. Dry humor, understatement, gentle sarcasm, irony, self-deprecating humor, playful exaggeration.
These are important words for understanding how English humor often works.
And they explain why the joke is sometimes hard for learners to notice.
Yes, because the humor is often subtle.
Very useful phrases. It depends on tone. Timing matters. You have to read the room. The joke landed well. The joke didn't land. It was the wrong moment. It sounded too serious.
These are extremely useful in real conversations.
Yes, especially if you want to explain why something was funny or not funny. Useful, natural phrases. It's fine if the atmosphere is relaxed. It depends on the relationship. It works better when people know each other well. It's risky if the topic is too sensitive. It can make people feel uncomfortable. The humor should feel shared.
This is very useful because good humor is social, not only linguistic.
That's true. If learners want to joke more naturally, these are safer styles. Light, self-deprecating comments, playful observations, small exaggerations, situational humor. Examples. Well, that went well. Lovely weather when it's raining badly. Yes, I've got everything completely under control when clearly you don't. That was very professional of me after a small mistake.
These little comments sound much more natural than trying too hard to be funny.
That's exactly it. Here are some key phrases from today's lesson. To be honest, it depends. That makes sense. I completely agree. The humor is very subtle. The joke may land badly. You have to read the room. It crossed the line. It felt playful, not rude. It sounded just believable enough.
These phrases are useful not only for this topic, but for many real conversations too.
You're absolutely right. Here's a natural answer example. I enjoy jokes when they're light, clever, and harmless. I think English humor is often dry and understated, so sometimes the joke is in the tone, not in the words.
I think it's okay to joke when the atmosphere is relaxed and people feel comfortable.
But if the topic is too sensitive or the person is upset, it's better not to joke. For me, the best humor creates warmth, not discomfort.
That sounds natural, clear, and very real.
Yeah, exactly. Now let's practice a little. Do you enjoy April Fool's jokes?
Yes, if, or not really because
Do you like playful exaggeration?
I like
Do you think sarcasm is funny?
sometimes if, or not always because
When is it okay to joke?
usually when,
How can you tell when someone is joking in English?
usually because of.
So, as you can see, talking about humor in English is not only about learning the word joke.
It's also about tone, timing, understatement, and understanding when humor helps a conversation.
That's the point. And that's what makes your English sound more natural, more culturally aware, and more real.
And if you enjoy lessons like this, don't forget to subscribe.
It really helps the channel grow and reach more people.
And it helps more learners practice real, natural English.
So subscribe, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next lesson.
Bye!